You are listening to the IoT for All Media Network.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the IoT for All podcast on the IoT for All Media Network. I'm your host, Ryan Chacon, one of the co-creators of IoT for All. Now, before we jump into this episode, please don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform or join our newsletter at iotforall.com/newsletter to catch all the newest episodes as soon as they come out. So, without further ado, please enjoy this episode of the IoT for All podcast. Welcome, Greg, to the IoT for All show. Thanks for being here today.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Nice to meet you, Ryan.
Yeah, you as well. I wanted to start off by just having you introduce yourself to our audience, give a little background, experience, anything you think is relevant to give the audience some context they're listening to.
Yeah, thanks. My name is Greg Young, and I'm the Vice President of Cybersecurity with Trend Micro. Trend Micro is a big company, about 7,000 or 8,000 people, been around 30 some years. Like me, I've been in IT security for about 33 years now. Okay. I sound tall on podcasts. I've done a bunch of different roles and I've worked kind of, in the management role as a CISO for like the Federal Department of Communications, but also the hands-on stuff. So I did a lot of work in smart card security with integrated circuits and and I was with Gartner as an analyst for 14 years.
Very cool. Let me ask, in your experience over the last number of years in this space, how have you seen the security industry change, and what have been the biggest kind of pieces of technology implementation, or just the biggest kind of trends that you've seen in the market over that time span that you've been in it to get to where it is now?
Yeah, it's just everything about trust has changed. So I think this may sound sort of simplistic, but in a way, we started out that we really trusted the components that we used. So before we used an operating system, it would just be beaten up by authorities and certification agencies. Mm-hmm. And now we use stuff we don't even know where it's from. And that's neither good nor bad. It's the way it is. And we have to react accordingly. So we can't put a lot of trust in the stuff we use. So we have to trust how we use it.
Absolutely. Let me ask you a little bit more about Trend Micro, just high level, kind of obviously security space, really connected IoT, just a little bit high level information about what the company does and the role you all play in IoT for our audience sake.
Yeah, so Trend is a very international company, very, very globally spread. We have headquarters in a bunch of different countries. Historically, a lot of business in Japan, but has since moved across the globe in the last 30 years. Business in IoT specifically, we've got a segment of the business very focused on that. And it's true IoT, and it's split across those kinds of traditional sort of definitions of the consumer-based sort of, Internet of Things, and then the operational technology focus. We even have initiatives in connected cars where we're working with manufacturers there. And we've got some equipment that attaches to, manufacturing devices or other operational technology.
Now, where do you see kind of some of the biggest, vulnerabilities when it comes to the IoT space as it relates to security that maybe people aren't addressing or people need to be thinking more about?
I think the biggest issue today is that there's components that we know nothing about them. So, in the past where we had less dynamic supply chains and cost really wasn't as optimizable as it was today, we'd have a really good idea of what components and what the specifications were, the protocols, even the software that was used. It stayed around a while. But now, and it's a good thing that we change components a lot because it helps keep the price down, which is great. We can get better things, faster things, cheaper things, and we can change them around in these components. But we no longer know kind of what's in the black box anymore. So often the device may be trusted in a sense, but the bits we're using, they could have vulnerabilities within them. And the manufacturer themselves may have no idea that there's vulnerabilities in there, nor have the ability to even sort of test for those.
Interesting. So how do you kind of handle those situations when working with customers or just engaging with the market with so many different components being out there and creating those kind of vulnerabilities?
A lot of it is catch up in a way, and taking the lessons we've learned in the last sort of 3 to 4 decades in traditional IT security and trying to in a way, port them, not directly layer them on, but make them adaptable to this new environment. So for example, we know that we can shield for vulnerabilities. So if you can't patch something, we can put stuff in front of it to kind of act as a virtual patch. Mm-hmm. So bringing those technologies, which we've had on the IT side, like intrusion prevention systems, and put those kind of, pre-patch or no patch shields in front of them. And also just the way they're assembled, and even just the idea of looking for vulnerabilities. A lot of manufacturers just honestly, and legitimately just haven't been exposed to that. So just bringing them to speed and say, hey, you should have a bug bounty program.
Sure.
Well, what's that? Well, yeah, people find a problem, they can report it to you. Wow, what a great idea. But support's for that. No, this is special. This is for security stuff.
Diving in a little bit more to the bug bounty program, how has that kind of benefited the IT space, and now kind of getting into IoT? How do you see that kind of playing a role, and what can organizations do to kind of get that going? Is that just something just easily just kind of make aware to their users and have a way for them to report any bugs that they find, and kind of simple as that, or is there more to it?
Yeah, it's actually simple nowadays that there's organizations, there's third parties that you can outsource this to. There's, sort of, bug bounties as a service, as a way to report back and saying, hey, I as a researcher or I as a customer have found something and I need to report it to you very quickly or into the certain parameters. It should be as easy as possible so they can fix it or notify customers who then shield it. Especially when there's an embedded system that's very easy to or very easy to patch or very easy to shield. It's that simple. Even just having something on your website or even a phone number sometimes is all it takes. Just the awareness and also the internal culture to say, hey, you're reporting a vulnerability. You must be a hacker. We're going to sue you.
Right. And as this kind of connects a little bit to what you mentioned a second ago about the component vulnerabilities that are ever present kind of in the IoT space. Is there one component of an IoT solution that you see more security issues kind of being centered around, like the hardware piece, the connectivity piece, the cloud piece, et cetera? Since the IoT space is very component driven, and most times those components are coming from different partners and different manufacturers. So is there one area where you see is more vulnerable to security threats than the other?
Yeah, definitely. There's a few kind of ones that are on the top of the list. So the first is generally any sort of wireless components, because if there's an issue there, it's going to be typically widely distributed. And that's also most often where we're trying to, the one point where we can really secure an otherwise unsecurable IoT component. We catch it to the wireless, catch it to communications. We can mostly protect it there. That's number one. The other ones is typically in protocols, because the protocols are often so bespoke, customized. They're not traditional sort of TCP/IP. Any of the protocol level, if there's a vulnerability in a protocol, it's kind of the worst thing. It's like there's a flaw in our language and how we discuss things, rather than in the software. And the last is in older operating systems that are embedded, or HMIs as well, that are sort of done without any sort of design, a thought of security in mind.
Okay, interesting. Now let me ask this question: as we're kind of growing in the IoT space as an industry, we're bringing in new connectivity types, 5G is coming into play, and so forth. What type of security issues do new technologies like 5G kind of bring to the space on top of the usual ones that we're seeing that you're talking about now?
Yeah, it's great that you mentioned on top of, because that's really the case. So when a whole new kind of technology comes in, like what happened with cloud, we see that now with 5G, that any vulnerabilities or any sort of security issues that come with 5G, big enterprises, they're going to be challenged in some ways to deal with these, or big manufacturers or traditional IT manufacturers. But to do that in the IoT sense is going to be challenging. So all those vulnerabilities get layered on top. And since IoT is so communications dependent for security, that's going to be really interesting. When a security guy says interesting, it's normally bad.
So how does a company like Trend Micro or other companies in the space that focus on security stay kind of up to date on discovering the types of vulnerabilities that these new technologies and different components have to help, not just come up with solutions to, but just be aware of in general? Seems like a very overwhelming task.
Yeah, you have to do a couple of things. So one is you have to invest. So, and in the specific area. So just taking general IT vulnerability research, that may be a foundation, but you can't port that over again. It's a really different environment. So you have to spend specific research dollars on it. It's a well hidden secret that Trend discovers more vulnerabilities than any other company in the world by quite a bit. We've got a whole bunch of programs like the Zero Day Initiative and other ones. So we have the researchers and we have the third-party researchers who we pay to find vulnerabilities, but you have to allocate a piece of the pie to them to say, hey, we only want to find IoT vulnerabilities or OT ones. So we're setting aside a piece of the pie to find those. The other one is doing initiatives. For example, we set up a phony factory, a honeypot factory, where we said this is going to be a manufacturing facility. It's not just going to be in a virtual machine. We're going to actually have equipment, and we're going to make it look like it, and then we're going to watch what the bad guys do when they beat on this. So it's going one step beyond just saying, hey, let's simulate a factory. No, let's really simulate a factory so the bad guys can't spot it easily. And we'll try to catch a more sophisticated kind of attack.
Right.
We won't just catch the easy stuff. We'll try to catch some attacks that are a little more advanced than James Bondy.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, in addition to just the component aspect of it and the new technologies that are coming into the space, how do the use cases themselves influence, or I guess, what is the trend across use cases you're seeing as it comes to use cases that are more vulnerable to security threats? As far as, are there industries that are you're seeing more security issues arise? Is it based on industry? Is it based on use cases? Is it based on maybe the technologies that are attached to those that you kind of already alluded to? How are you seeing it as it relates to more real life examples of use cases being kind of deployed out in the field?
Yeah, I like your word use case too, because that's a great way to describe it, that there isn't sort of a generic sort of attack on IoT or attack on OT. It's very, very generalized. So one is, existing vulnerabilities are the bulk of attacks. So 99.9% of attacks are ones we've seen before. Successful attacks, ones we've seen before, typically on unpatched systems. So going after unpatched stuff on IoT is the easy one. Right now, we're in a trend, unfortunately, that healthcare is being actively targeted. Because of COVID, it's rich territory. So that's one. And the third is treating it as general IT. So if there's a system and we can ransomware it, we're going to ransomware it. And the last one is where it's very sort of targeted. That's the very top of the pyramid, a very small amount, but where it's much more knowledgeable. There's much more in-depth reconnaissance going on. And it's not just sort of, hey, a Windows machine, I'm going to beat it up. No, it's going to be, it's a Windows machine in this kind of environment. I can find lateral movement through PLCs. That kind of advanced one. That's a smaller one, but that's obviously the most concerning.
Yeah. So as you kind of mentioned, the healthcare side of things, the vulnerabilities there, are there any particular instances of security threats that you could maybe elaborate on to just kind of bring it full circle into a real example of what you're seeing happen in the healthcare space that maybe as an audience we wouldn't be kind of recognize as happening?
Yeah, one is that a lot of hospitals, for reasons of organization history, they don't treat medical devices as part of the IT organization. And it ends up that nobody ends up protecting them, or it's just they're deployed, hope they're going to be secure, but they're not kind of cared for like we would have our other systems saying, hey, we have to patch it, we have to watch them, we have to monitor them. And that's a generalization. That's a little unfair, but a lot of hospitals really struggle with that, especially for community ones. They really struggle. So when we did, for example, a Shodan search, we found hospitals from all around the world that were internet accessible, their medical devices, particularly the controllers that the medical devices speak to. So that's those statistics, and those don't match either with sort of distribution. It's not proportional. We found some countries were overrepresented by size. Places like India and the US, of course, were very high. But so places like Mexico, that was kind of surprising. Yeah, the other one we found is that there's a lot of forgery going on with devices that are supposed to be one make and manufacturer are labeled as something else. So we found a lot of fraud going on with the barcodes being assembled on them and what they're being purported to be, when actually they're much older vintage devices.
And what's the kind of reasoning for that? You're seeing that happening? Like, what are the benefits they're getting out of doing this?
All comes back to money, as most things do in life. The bad guys some unethical people have wised up that in the reselling of medical equipment, that if you sell it something that's newer, it's worth more. So they'll take an older device, relabel the barcode to purport it to be a newer one, get more money for that. And great. So you've got this IV device, which is smart accessible. But the problem is if you try to patch it, the software may break it. So if you have this medical device now and you say, much akin like I'm going to try to apply a Windows 10 patch to a Win95 server, that won't work. And neither will this, except that those protections that are built into preventing those kinds of patches being applied in Windows aren't there for a lot of medical devices. So, I plug in my USB or I go wireless and try to update the device. I brick it. Or I cause it to fail, and then you've got this device instead of service.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I if you're not connected to that space, you probably have no idea it's even happening.
Yeah, and sadly, again, the people deploying these devices, the hospital staff, they're not IT people, so to watch for that and that kind of inventorying, or even the concept of saying, hey, we should match the barcode with some other information on the device, like the labeling or serial numbering or model number, that just is an extra task that busy healthcare people don't have time for often.
Yeah, it's truly unfortunate they're taking advantage of that kind of industry and market for financial gain like that.
Right. And sadly, right now, it's all about ransomware. They're just ransomware in the heck out of hospitals right now. It's really sad, but that's the trend.
Yeah, especially during the pandemic.
Yeah. People will pay up right now because they need to get back to business. So.
Yep. It's really unfortunate. So I wanted to shift away from the healthcare space and kind of go into like, I don't want to say it's like the opposite end of the spectrum, but something that's, is an interesting topic to talk about as far as IoT goes, and that's more the connected car space. So, that's something I think people have a lot of fear when it comes to security, because connected cars, if they're hacked, what can happen? That's obviously, a very life or death type potential outcome. So what are you seeing as far as the security of the platforms behind the connected cars? Now, assuming, we would like to think that there's more money invested in something like that to make them more secure. But how are you kind of seeing the contrast in the connected car space as it relates to other spaces like healthcare and so forth?
In the car space, the auto manufacturers have done a brilliant job, and credit where credit is due. It's very easy in security to kind of poke companies in the eye or industries in the eye and saying, "Oh, it's not perfect," but they have done, frankly, a fantastic job in a couple of areas. So one is actually the in-car systems, the general systems, and then there's the entertainment systems as well, which are kind of often the user interface. But both of those sides, they've done a fantastic job in protecting them. Of course, not all automakers are equal, especially ones from different parts of the globe. But definitely for the ones that most of your listeners are going to be engaged with, really great. Well and above. In fact, I would say that in many respects, they do better than the general IT industry in securing these devices. So there's always new things. So, Tesla's always a popular participant in our hackathons, and credit to them for having a really active bounty program and not being ashamed to let other people pound on their stuff. But most of the in-car systems, they're even tamper-proofed, which is fantastic. We don't see a lot of manufacturing devices do that, where you can't physically tamper with it, or if you tamper, it'll be evident. Use of cryptography, and having updatable software easily done and recognizable with good quality control, and also the ability to check if a patch is successfully applied. So a lot of great systems, and again, they do have bug bounty programs as well to make sure that if people find a problem, especially researchers, they'll act on it.
Now, you mentioned something in here that you've kind of seen some, different levels of security and vulnerabilities based on the kind of the area in which the company or the region in which the company is operating in. Have you seen that across all different industries? And if so, are there certain areas of the world that are you're seeing more security threats kind of coming out of based on like maybe the components that are being developed in those areas versus others? Or is it not really kind of like correlated to any one region in particular?
Yeah, I think the correlation is probably, cost is everything. So where you're expecting to get the cheapest components and you're going to pay the lowest price, you kind of get the security that you're paying for there. So a lot of components coming out of East Asia, again, because you're demanding the lowest price from them, they're going to give you the lowest price. A great example was there was a vulnerability found in a component. It was a very widely distributed component. It was a wireless one. And I spoke to the manufacturer. Happened to finally, for once, I could actually find a manufacturer to talk to. And they said, well, we can't really patch that software. We said, why not? Well, we don't have the dev team anymore. Well, why don't you? They said, well, we can't keep a dev team around. So why not? Well, because they said we charge 10 cents. Our competitors who keep a dev team, they charge 12 cents. So if we had the dev team, we would be out of business because we wouldn't be able to compete anymore because there's somebody out there charging 11 who doesn't have a dev team. So we'd be charging 12 and, we'd be out of business. So, being insecure is actually our business case. They didn't quite say that, but that was the bottom line was that, hey, when you're carving off a cent off of every, of the small components, that's, something has to give.
Yeah. That's amazing how it's, the margins are so razor thin that people are sacrificing something as important as security that the end user has no idea of until maybe, they encounter one of those security threats.
Yeah, and that chip was embedded in many, many consumer devices, especially sort of keyboards and mice. So that was a very widely distributed component. And again, that's a lot. That's a when there's millions and millions of components, that's a lot of money. So.
It is. And is there anything that can kind of be done after a component like that is built and launched into, put into a product? Is there anything like how does that usually handled when security is then just, security threat like that is discovered later on? Because, you don't know this is a problem until, either it's reported or consumers, get their hands on it, or a company like yours comes across it, and then you talk to the manufacturer and learn that, they're not taking security, or they're not really prioritizing security. So how does that usually handled, or what can be done?
Yeah, there's a couple of steps. In the best cases is where it is software addressable, that it can be patched. So even if you don't have the dev team, you can go back, kind of tear it apart. If there are notes or it's commented at all, you can see, oh, okay, here's the buffer overflow that they're exploiting. Got it. And then you can hopefully patch it if that's possible. That's the best case scenario. Not always the case. If it's burned in silicon, for example, or if it's not software addressable or fixable, that's not good. So ideally, what you do then is you hopefully can address it from the OEM of that component. Say, hey, we have this issue. We can't fix it. Maybe you can, because this is encased in a laptop, say. So you're gonna, if we have this patch which is associated with your laptop, then you can protect it, or you can change your software so this can't be exploited anymore. Last case is nothing can be done. Just hope, try to use intrusion prevention, whether it be software, hardware, or networker in the device, and that's about all you can really do.
Wow. Okay. One of the last questions I have for you before we wrap up here is kind of relating to, I guess, the information around security. So this is something that we kind of mentioned ahead of the recording, but the vulnerability research economy is growing pretty rapidly from your all's perspective. Can you talk to our audience a little bit more about what that exactly means, as far as what does that research look like? What is that what's the value there? What value does it provide kind of just ongoing? And how have you seen that kind of economy in the IoT space as it relates, and then comparing it to other technology industries that, the same kind of tasks are performed, the same kind of research is performed? Are you seeing IoT kind of growing more quickly? Or are you seeing it not be as attractive of an industry from a researcher's perspective because of one reason or another?
Yeah, you phrased that really well about attractive to researchers. Definitely it's changing. There is some interest now in IoT vulnerability research, but it's not growing as fast as the IoT space is. So what this is, there's a whole economy now that's really layered around finding vulnerabilities. It used to be people would find bad, holes and stuff. They would report it. It was a hobby, but now it's become a full-time job for the good guys to find stuff. And we want the good guys to find it, not the bad guys, because then it's a 0 day. We don't find out about it. But when the good guys find stuff, they go to the company and they say, hey, look, manufacturer, we found this vulnerability in your, in your turbine software, or the human interface for it. We're reporting it to you. We're going to keep it quiet. You've got this much time to fix it. Please do so. Tell us when it's fixed, so then we can disclose it. So we can have people who haven't patched it, we can put a shield out for it. That's a sort of a long-winded discussion or description of what it is. But even people interested in doing that, will they get paid, right? You've got to get paid to do this as a full-time job. And that's where the bug bounty programs come in. So if you're encouraging people to find stuff, it's good news. But the challenge is there's not enough companies out there. So when you look at all of the sort of the big names in, IoT manufacturing, very few of them have these kinds of programs, which is really unfortunate. So, third parties come in there to get involved with that, but it's still not a healthy enough economy yet. And the losers are the users, because you're getting stuff that's not being examined as much. You want ethical researchers to look at this stuff and find the holes before the bad guys do. That's changing. More companies are investing in it, and more research backers or third parties are also starting to help. An individual researcher trying to make a big company, like an elevator manufacturer, change their ways is tough, but a sort of a clearinghouse for those has a better job, sort of a middleman to do it. Still, it's moving slowly.
Okay. So one of the last things I want to ask you before we finish here is around just general stuff going on in the industry that our audience may not be or stay as closely on top of. And then also expectations kind of going into 2021 around the security side. So are there any kind of news or happenings going on in the industry that is worth noting to our audience that's is kind of a big deal to the security space? And then at the same time, what are you looking forward to going into 2021, or what are you hoping will happen to kind of really take some major strides on the IoT front as it relates to security?
Some of the big things going on are certainly, hopefully, better use of cryptography moving forward. There's some we find, I think there's been a change that we're finally getting better use of cryptography and encryption into IoT devices. The downside is they're using a lot of third-party libraries, often, again, getting the cheapest one they can find, often for free, which may in itself have vulnerabilities in it. The worst thing you can have is vulnerabilities in crypto because you trust it. But then, if everybody's got the master key, that's not a good thing. So I think the standard should be, hey, let's hold our devices at least as good as an automatic teller. If we can secure those, we can certainly just, secure other stuff. It doesn't have to have that kind of investment like the physical tamper proofing, but at least for that basic level of crypto, it's actually really easy to do. There's a great standard out there called FIPS 140, really easy to follow, basic stuff. Even just awareness of that in dev shops. Before you use a crypto toolkit, please, make sure it's a good one. Other changes I think are that, again, we're seeing more of the manufacturers stepping up this year, more hackathons, more, pwn to own events, we call them, where there's going to be IoT components. And I think that it'd be great to see, and I'm looking forward and hoping I'm going to see more sponsorship, more interest from the manufacturers getting involved instead of being passive bystanders, really getting in there. And that, I think, could be a quality differentiator amongst them.
Absolutely. That's great. These insights have been pretty cool to listen to. I appreciate you taking the time to kind of share them with our audience. We mentioned security. We have some security experts here and there, but some of the insights you shared are very unique and I think very relevant to what our audience is, or what our audience should know as it relates to the IoT front. If our audience kind of, has additional questions or wants to learn more about Trend Micro or more about just like kind of what you all are doing or anything follow up from this conversation, what's the best way they can do that?
Yeah, I think for contact with me, I'm on LinkedIn as Greg Young with Trend Micro, and on Twitter as at Orange Klaxon, or you can find me just on Trend Micro. And for the Trend Micro stuff, we've got a whole bunch of public available research on IoT security. Just you can search on Trend Micro IoT security. We've got some great reports. Like we just had some on self-driving buses in Taiwan. About blind spots and ICS security, about the gateways, and also some smart city stuff. We've got all kinds of research there on also that factory honeypot report has been published too. That's a great one.
Awesome. Okay. Fantastic. Well, Greg, it's been great having you here. I really appreciate it. It's been great meeting you and having you share your insights with our audience. Truly appreciate it. And hopefully we'll be able to have you back sometime to talk more about what's going on in the industry and kind of, the viewpoint from your side as well as Trend Micro side, and just keep our listeners up to date on all the things happening on the security front. Oh,
it's my pleasure, Ryan. Thanks a lot. I've been a long time listener, first time caller. So it's been fun for me too.
Fantastic. Great to have you.
And cheers.
All right, everyone. Thanks again for joining us this week on the IoT for All podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you did, please leave us a rating or review and be sure to subscribe to our podcast on whichever platform you're listening to us on. Also, if you have a guest you'd like to see on the show, please drop us a note at ryan@iotforall.com and we'll do everything we can to get them as a featured guest. Other than that, thanks again for listening and we'll see you next time.